Today we're going to talk about the libertarian position on landlords. In other words, I want to discuss about what is a libertarian perspective on the legitimacy of modern day landlords. Do they legitimately own the land that they own? And if not, why not? So if you want to talk about, or if you want to learn about why the non-aggression principle is true, I have sources. Whichever direction, I forgot which direction I need to point, but click the top, the link. Anyways, but we're going to briefly go over some libertarian theory so I can so that you understand what I'm talking about, and then we're going to apply that theory to modern day status property norms, and then conclude from there. You can determine any given landlord is either legitimate or not. One of my most favorite sources of learning libertarian theory is from Rothbard's The Ethics of Liberty. So, quoting from page 34, "Let us now return to our analysis of Crusoe's purposeful transformation of nature-given data through the understanding of natural law. Crusoe finds virgin, unused land on the island, land in short unused and uncontrolled by anyone, and hence unowned. By finding land resources, by learning how to use them, and in particular by actually transforming them into a more useful shape, Crusoe has, in the memorable phrase of John Locke, mixed his labor with the soil. In doing so, in stamping the imprint of his personality and his energy on the land, he has naturally converted the land and its fruits into his property. Hence, the isolated man owns what he uses and transforms. Therefore, in his case, there is no problem of what should be A's property as against B's. Any man's property is, fancy a Latin word, is perfecto. What he produces, that is, what he transforms into use by his own effort. His property in land and capital goods continue down the various stages of production until Crusoe comes to own the consumer goods which he has produced, until they finally disappear through his consumption of them." The next excerpt I want to share comes from page 47. Quote, "Let us return to our island of Crusoe and Friday. Crusoe, isolated at first, has used his free will and self-ownership to learn about his wants and values, and how to satisfy them by transforming nature-given resources through mixing them with his labor. He has thereby produced and created property. Now suppose that Friday lands in another part of the island. He confronts two possible courses of action. He may, like Crusoe, become a producer, transform unused soil by his labor, and most likely exchange his product for that of the other man. In short, he may engage in production and exchange, and also creating property. Or he may decide upon another course. He may spare himself the effort of production and exchange, and go over and seize by violence the fruits of Crusoe's labor. He may aggress against the producer. If Friday chooses the course of labor and production, then he, in natural fact, as in the case of Crusoe, will own the land area which he clears and uses, as well as the fruits of its production. But as we have noted above, suppose that Crusoe decides to claim more than his natural degree of ownership, and asserts that by virtue of merely landing first on the island, he really owns the entire island, even though he had made no previous use of it. If he does so, then he is, in our view, illegitimately pressing his property claim beyond its homesteading natural law boundaries. And if he uses that claim to try to eject Friday by force, then he is illegitimately aggressing against the person and property of the second homesteader." The next excerpt I would like to share, quote, "Any area of land which is given by nature might never have been used and transformed, and therefore any existing property title to never used land would have to be considered invalid. For we have seen that title to an unowned resource, such as land, comes properly only from the expenditure of labor to transform that resource into use. Therefore, if any land has never been transformed, no one can legitimately claim its ownership." And the last excerpt I would like to share, quote, "What then is to be our view toward investment in oil lands, one of the major forms of foreign investment in underdeveloped countries in today's world? The major error of most analysis is to issue either a blanket approval or a blanket condemnment, for the answer depends on the justice of the property title established in each specific case. Where, for example, an oil company, foreign or domestic, lays claim to the oil field which discovers and drills, then this is its just homesteaded private property, and it is unjust for the underdeveloped government to tax or regulate the company. Where the government insists on claiming ownership of the land itself and only leases the oil to the company, then the government's claim is illegitimate and invalid, and the company, in the role of the homesteader, is properly the owner and not merely the renter of the oil land. On the other hand, there are cases where the oil company uses the government of the underdeveloped country to grant it, in advance of drilling, a monopoly concession to all the oil in a vast land area, thereby agreeing to the use of force to squeeze out all competing oil producers who might search for and drill oil in that area. In that case, as in the case above of Crusoe's arbitrarily using force to squeeze out Friday, the first oil company is illegitimately using the government to become a land and oil monopolist. Ethically, any new company that enters the scene to discover and drill oil is the proper owner of its homesteaded oil area. A priori, of course, our oil concessionaire, who also used this estate to eject peasants from their land by force, as was done before, for example, by the Creole Oil Company in Venezuela, is a collaborator with the government in the latter's aggression against the property rights of the peasantry. That is the last excerpt I would like to share. Now I would like to direct your attention to some American history. So I just would like to read from the Preemption Act of 1841 Wikipedia article. The Preemption Act of 1841, also known as the Distributive Preemptive Act, was a U.S. federal law approved on September 4th, 1841. It was designed to approve the proceeds of the sales of public land and to grant preemptive rights to individuals who were living on federal lands, commonly referred to as squatters. So I've constructed this list for us to analyze. Government claim: all land in the U.S. originally treated as federal public land. Survey and parcels: land divided into parcels through government surveys, public land survey system. Homesteaders: the settlers often moved onto land before government sale. They improved and worked the land. Legitimate ownership by the homesteading principle. Government called them trespassers, later passed laws to recognize the claims, but only after settlers bought the land. So it's extortion, because they homesteaded the land, so that is their rightful property. Even though they are squatters, they are the rightful owners. The government does not have a right to just claim all this land to be theirs for them to parcel off and sell to individuals. So this act, which is granting these settlers a recognized right by the government to keep what they actually own, they're effectively being extorted to buy the land that they already homesteaded. But according to the Libertarian Creed, there's no need because they already own it. So, like I said, it's extortion. However, this gets tricky when we talk about government sale grants to speculators and corporations and railroads, especially during that time in the Civil War. I am especially trying to refer to the Big Four Central Pacific Railroad. The Big Four was the name popularly given to the famous and influential businessmen and railroad tycoons, also called the robber barons, who funded the Central Pacific Railroad. These buyers, these crony capitalists, such as the Big Four, the Big Central Four with the Central Railroad tycoon stuff, they did not homestead the land, and it was fabricated by state authority, not by labor mixing, so they cannot properly own it. So in summary, we have two parcel land origins and their status of being properly owned. You have the homesteader to title path, libertarian legit origin, later wrapped in state paperwork, or you have the government to buyer path, state fabricated, not legit by homesteading norms. And the answer to any individual case can be somewhere in between. For example, you could have a situation where there was someone who was originally homesteading on public land and then was granted recognition from the federal government to own it, but their recognition is extended beyond their natural borders, which is what Rothbard was talking about. So the part that they have naturally homesteaded is what they truly own, and the portion that is state fabricated, any acres of land that is granted to them, but actually is virgin land that has not been touched by humans, is actually still unowned, and effectively, whether it is intended or not, the person who holds this claim is leveraging state violence, the threat of state violence, for anyone to come in and homestead that portion of the land or portion of the parcel that is virgin land. Any individual or group who leverages the state threat of violence, preventing people from homesteading virgin land that is granted to said individual or group, is an aggressor and violates the rights of everyone, basically. Now, let's attribute all this theory and apply it to a specific example of landlordism. So, I'm using ChatGPT for research, but I think you get the point anyways. Here's a real-world example of a government leasing land to a private developer for housing construction. In downtown Sacramento, California, land was leased to the CADA by the state government. The state provided the land at a significantly reduced lease rate, facilitating the project's affordability. CADA oversaw the development of the 58-unit apartment building. CADA is responsible for the ongoing management and maintenance of the property. Now, I'm sure you can see from what we've just been talking about that CADA cannot actually legitimately own these apartment buildings, since they are leveraging state violence, granting them land that they do not properly own and developing on it. But because their development of these 58-unit apartment buildings was done under duress of everyone else in the community, this cannot be legitimate homesteading of these 58-unit apartment buildings, and therefore it actually remains unowned. So applying our theory, we can deduce that CADA does not own the 58-unit apartment building because they are leveraging state violence with leased land, which puts everyone in the community under duress, the threat of state violence, and granting CADA a state-granted monopoly so that they can construct the 58-unit apartment building. Because this clearly violates libertarian law, the CADA does not own these 58-unit apartment buildings, and all the tenants rightfully own their part that they have homesteaded, their apartment building, effectively. These landlords, the CADA, is effectively extorting their tenants. They extort with rent money, of course. The tenants of these buildings have the libertarian right to seize these 58-unit apartment buildings and declare liberty from their landlords. However, there is a different kind of landlord that is actually ethically permissible from a libertarian perspective. If someone actually truly owns their house legitimately, it is totally okay for them to rent a part of their house out or rent a part of their property out to someone who wants it. If you have any questions, please let me hear them in the comment section down below. If you like what I like to do is to teach the libertarian ethic and Austrian economics sometimes, even though I haven't done a video on Austrian economics in a while, subscribe. If you have money to burn, don't burn them, give it to me through Ko-fi. Coffee. It's pronounced coffee. Link down in the description below. And if you like more autistic cancer, join my Discord server down below. Like the video, and I don't know, that's the end of the video.